All
right, so
yeah.
I'm recording this so that if you need to re-listen to it, once I get the recording from the cloud later today, I send that out to the offices and they do post that somewhere. Not really sure where, but you can ask the wonderful people at your front desk where to find the recording, and then you can go back over and review this. The document itself, as you can see, I've typed in there in red some notes so that you can actually get this document from them as well. And when you are getting ready to go on a listing appointment, you can use this as a cheat sheet for how to fill it out. Right. So good morning, everyone. And those of you that are live on screen, I appreciate that. If you have questions at any time, just take yourself off mute, shout out your questions. If you type it into the chat, I don't really pay attention to the chat a lot when I'm talking. So just interrupt me, take yourself off mute and ask your questions. We'll address it at that time. Now, as with every document from FAR, at the bottom left corner, you will see down here, ERS 20TN and the date that the contract or the paperwork was last revised. So again, what we are going over today is the ERS, the exclusive right of sale, the 20TN. The 20 is the latest version. TN means transition. I believe in single agency with the transition to transaction brokerage if the need allows. I'll go over that when we hit that portion of the listing agreement, but I want you to understand that's what I'm teaching is single agency. I believe that you owe a fiduciary to your client and you should be representing them and just them in a transaction, right? Now, if that's not how you feel, I'm as your broker, this is just my feeling. I will never dictate to one of our agents as to how they're going to do things because there are agents in the office that just want to be a transaction broker right from the get-go. They'll use the ERS 20TB. It is pretty well the identical document to this with the exclusion of the transition. And it will just be transaction brokerage. So that's the only part of the listing agreement that does change any. All right. So starting on line 2, as you can see, I put as per tax record. That's the seller. So you get an appointment to go out on a listing appointment. And the first thing you're going to do is to go into the tax records, go into IMAP, and you're going to pull up all the information you can on the property. And it will tell you who owns the property. If it is John Smith and Mary Smith, that's what goes there. If it is 123 Main Street, LLC, that's what goes there. If it's the Richard Bass Irrevocable Trust, that's what goes there. Now, in those last 2 examples, you understand that corporations or trusts are literally inanimate objects. They're corporations. A corporation can't sign a document. So somebody is going to sign on their behalf. Now, it would be acceptable, as I said, use my case. If my property was owned under the Richard Bass Trust, you would put in there Richard Bass trustee for Richard Bass Trust. You could put John Smith, president, 123 Main Street, LLC. And when they sign the documents, they're signing just like that. John Smith, president for 123 Main Street, LLC. Other than that, that line is going to be printed exactly as you see on the tax records. Now, line 3 is the brokerage. That's the name of the office that you're in. Okay, so it's going to be Keller Williams Realty Professionals, Keller Williams Realty Consultants, or if you're in Aventura, Keller Williams Elite Properties. That's the name of your office. It is not Keller Williams Realty, which is just a name. That's not even a corporation. Um, it is not your name / Keller Williams Realty Consultants. It is just the name of your office. That says broker or brokerage. That's all that goes there. All right. Now, paragraph 1 is what gives us the authority to sell the property. And there's 2 blanks in there: the date the listing agreement starts and the date that the listing agreement ends. I always recommend the start date is the date that you're meeting with those individuals. If someone's telling you, well, you know what, my wife and I need a couple of weeks to clean out things, we need some time, we want to repaint, we want to fix some things up, why don't we start the listing agreement 2 weeks from now? Well, if you post date the listing agreement, you're actually taking a chance that there's a neighbor or somebody they works with who gets wind that they're getting the house ready for sale, and they go, hey, you know what, I'd like to buy your house, or I know somebody who would like to buy your house, and they go to contract and you don't have a binding listing agreement because you post dated it. So always date it today, the day that you're meeting with them and the day they're going to sign this. You have the opportunity now that you can put it into coming soon status in the MLS, and then you can at least, put it out there and market it that in 2 weeks' time, you're going to open this up for people to show it. But always date that the day people are signing these documents. Now, the termination date. Again, there is no general rule or law as to what length a listing agreement should be. Historically, realtors have taken 6-month listing agreements. When you're dealing with higher end properties, it's also very typical to take 1-year listing agreements. But if somebody was to give me a 30-day price, I'd be happy to give them a 30-day listing agreement. I wouldn't do that. That was just a bad example. But my point is that date can be whatever it is you and the seller agree to for the term of the listing agreement, and a seller will never question what time frame you put in there. One of the hints I've always given people in the past, today's June 13th. If you do a 6-month listing agreement, it would expire December 13th, which is a date that none of you are going to remember. One of the most embarrassing things you'll ever go through is getting a phone call from a seller saying, hey, I've been getting phone calls from other realtors all morning that my listing's expired and do I want to relist with them? Because you forgot about it and you didn't call and have that conversation to extend your listing with them. So the hint that I give is pick a date that's going to mean something to you. Now, if you've been in the office for a while, we talk about how January 1 is actually the best day of the year to prospect for expireds, because the vast majority of listing agreements expire on December 31st. So January 1 is a great date to be prospecting for expired listings. The second best date to prospect for expired listings is actually July 1, because a lot of realtors have their listings expire the end of June. So here's a hint. Today doesn't really matter a lot. June 13th, if you make it expire December 31st, it sounds very logical to somebody. I've never gotten any emails from let me put people on mute here. There we go.
A quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
That form, I see that you're on simplicity. I'm very new, so this is what
Form simplicity is just where I go to get my documents to do this, because it's branded generally for the KW, not for the individual offices. If you go to command in your office, all of these documents are under command. That was
Perfect.
a good that was a good pickup.
Thank you.
I was actually having a conversation with somebody in one of the offices yesterday, uh, because in Form Simplicity, they were finding it branded, but
Yeah.
in DocuSign, it wasn't branded, or
Hmm.
not in DocuSign, in Command, it
Contact.
wasn't branded. And we actually have Miko looking into that to try and figure out why it's not, because the branded form should automatically be uploaded into Command.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the question. All right. So the hint that I'm giving you is, if you pick either December 31st or June 30th, those are logical dates for you to remember that listings are going to be expiring, and you'll just remember ahead of time to call somebody. Now, I have a interactive question here with you. Today's June 13th. Let's say you just went to contract on a property. Your listing agreement expires on June 30th, but the contract's not going to close until the middle or end of July. Do you need to have an extension for your listing agreement signed?
I would. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so one I would, one yes. And one of you is right and the other is kind of.
To cover
So if
ourselves, yes.
Yep. Well, if you read the very next line, it says, upon full execution of a contract for sale and purchase of the property, all rights and obligations of this agreement automatically extend through the date of the actual closing. So technically, no, you don't. However, to protect yourself, as Maxwell was saying, it's a very good idea to do it. When I present the contract to my seller to sign, I would also present a modification to listing agreement. The form is called MLA, modification to listing agreement. And that's the form you would use to make any change at all to a listing agreement. And it's like, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we have this contract now, contract scheduled to close sometime in July. Let's sign the extension for the listing agreement until the 1st of August, just to protect ourselves in case there's a little bit of delay. What you've done is, in protecting yourself, there's probably 20% of all contracts that you sign will fall apart for either inspections or appraisal contingencies. And if it falls apart after the termination date, you're SOL. You've lost the listing. If you got the extension signed for, say 30 days past when the closing should be, at least you bought yourself another little bit of time to try and get a second contract slid into place and hopefully get that one closed so you get paid at the end of the day. Not a major legal issue there, but just a little hint to try and make your life a little bit more secure and making sure you collect a commission at the end of the day. All right. Now, the rest of that first paragraph is pretty well the Fair Housing Act. Right? Property will be offered to any person without regard to race, color, religion, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, we still live in a day and age and a place where at some point in your career, you're going to come across a seller who is going to tell you, I'd really appreciate it if you don't bring any of those green people to my house. If you ever hear that from somebody, you take your books, you close them up, and you go, I'm sorry, I'm not the right person to work with on this. Don't get caught crossing the Fair Housing Act. First of all, it is absolutely morally wrong. It's also illegal. You don't need to work with someone like that. If you pack up your books and go away, I'd be willing to bet that person will say, oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. let's go ahead. Do you ever think you're going to present them with an offer and their first question is not going to be, tell me about the buyer? Guys, it's not worth it to work with somebody like that. We have defended several lawsuits in the office against the Fair Housing Act. Not pleasant to go through. We have E&O insurance to cover you on that. However, be aware your E&O insurance has a deductible on it, and I don't want to see any of you guys come out of pocket for a deductible and have to go through the time and effort to defend yourself in a fair housing complaint. So let's talk about that for a bit. When you list a property, you never talk about who a feature will apply to. You're talking about the property. House has a fabulous backyard. That's it. If you put house has a great backyard for the kids and pets to play in, you've now broken the Fair Housing Act because you've talked about familial status, the pets is incidental. You can't advertise property is in walking distance to the church or the synagogue. Now you're talking about both the religion and you're talking about handicap because you put walking distance. You can say property is close proximity to houses of worship. Same as you can say close proximity to shopping, convenient to all highways, convenient to transportation. You can talk about the feature of the property. Magnificent family room for entertaining. Not a magnificent family room, for kids and family nights of game nights type of stuff. Now, whatever it is you're going to say, keep it focused on the property, not who it applies to. Okay, hope that makes sense for you. Now, I also want you to be well aware that HUD employs what they call mystery shoppers. Not only HUD, but where we have been caught, there is actually a group based out of Orlando that will make phone calls to properties that they've seen advertised on the internet. And they're going to call you up and they're going to go, hey, I just saw your listing at, 123 Main Street. Can you tell me a little bit about the property? And you're going to tell them about the property and they're going to go, well, who lives in the neighborhood? What do you think they're after? Is it a great family neighborhood? They're going to ask you questions to try and trip you up on answering any of these. We've gotten caught with someone who was questioning a rental about whether it's approved for Section 8. As a realtor, that's not for you to answer. That's a great question. Why don't you submit the offer to lease and we'll present it to the landlord to see how he feels about it. Don't answer on behalf of your client. Let it be their decision. And you've got to have that kind of conversation with your client. You can't turn down Section 8 just because it's Section 8. You can look at their credit report. You can look at, request, the police record. You can request all the things you would from any tenant and make a decision based on that. Okay? You've got to be able to coach your client about not breaking the HUD rules. Okay? Michelle, that's exactly it. Michelle wrote in there that she sent the city data to a client who wants to know about a neighborhood. And you're right. You realize if you go to realtor.com or Zillow, there's a little button there that you can click for all of the neighborhood information. It'll give you a racial background. It'll give you financial backgrounds, familial background, the average age of the people, the average education of the people. All of this crap is out there for anybody to look at. Send them to the source to look at it for themselves. Don't you be the one to tell them what it is. In a lot of our offices, we're dealing with single family homes. We're dealing with families, and one of the most important things to them are schools. So they're going to ask you, is this home in a good school district? Mrs. Byer, I totally understand that question, and it is a very strong question. What I would recommend is you go to Broward County School Board or Palm Beach County School, whatever school board it is, and you could type in the area, the address of one of the properties we're looking at, and it will give you all of the information there is about the schools in there. The main farm area that Gail and I worked with for years, the middle school, since the day it opened, is one of these presidential rated schools. That's about all that I would ever share with somebody. And I'd share that because there's a great big sign in front of the school that says, presidential rated school. If they start asking, what kind of classes do they have? How are the teachers? What kind of extracurricular activities? I'm not answering that, because if it is important, if it's something that I felt was important, I'm answering it in a way that I would want answered, which might not be the way your buyer wants answered. So send them to the source for it.
Oh,
Okay?
I have a.
Now, all right, Lakita, just before I answer you, and thank you for doing that. I'm seeing that a couple people have put into the chat. I started by saying, if you have a question, just take yourself off mute, jump in and ask me the question, because I'm not really looking at that little bar that says somebody's in the chat room or posted something. So thank you, Lakita. Go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much. I just wanted to confirm. So all in regards to just rentals, they're all required to accept Section 8. Like they're not allowed to say they're not a property that doesn't accept it, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I've noticed that a way to kind of get around that is they're requesting the 2 deposits, but essentially they can pretty much do whatever they want and require whatever they want for their property, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so that's been an
That's
issue I've been running into. Yeah.
Yeah, and Gail and I are landlords for numbers of properties, and we've never dealt with Section 8, where it just happens to be where our properties are located. However, I look at it and I'm going, why wouldn't a landlord accept Section 8? Their rent is guaranteed by the government.
Yeah.
They're just afraid of it because they're thinking, well, the tenant is, not capable of paying their rent. Well, they're not. That's why the landlord is guaranteeing it for them.
Yeah, I've had a few be discriminatory against the type of tenant that Section 8 allows. And most times, yeah, they can only do that 1 deposit that's required of them. So that's the way to get around it, kind of. But okay, I just
Correct.
wanted to confirm.
Yep, you got it. All right, so that was a very long conversation about what's basically 2.5 lines on the listing agreement. But it is something that's extremely important for you to realize when you're working with both sellers and buyers. The Fair Housing Act is serious business. All right, paragraph 2, description of the property. Street address, easy enough. That's what you're driving up to. The legal description, again, straight out of the tax record. That's going to be, Riverside, Plat J, Block B, Lot 13. Real simple. Unless you come across a piece of property, very rare, that has a lengthy legal description, in which case you're going to check this box here that says see attachment. You would write A. On the tax record, at the top of it, you would write attachment A, and they would just initial that, and it becomes part of your listing agreement. Very, very rare. Okay. Personal property, including appliances. Okay. I happen to like how your FAR/BAR as is contract is written better than the listing agreement, because this kind of expects you to list everything that's going to stay. On your contract, it's actually, already tells you what is supposed to be included in it. The good thing about this line is it gives you the opportunity to have a conversation with a seller about what they're thinking they're going to leave with the property. One of the big ones is a washer and dryer, right? A lot of sellers think that they can take the washer and dryer with them when they leave. You want to make sure you understand what their thought process is. Personally, I don't know why I would want to take a used washer and dryer where I'm going, that's where I'm going to put the new one. I'm going to leave the used ones for who's ever buying my house. But here's a couple of them that you're going to get caught on. You're walking through the house when you're at the listing appointment. Mrs. Seller, I noticed that very unusual chandelier in the dining room, which is a polite way of saying really ugly. Are you planning on leaving that with the house? Oh no, my mother-in-law gave that to us as a housewarming gift. Fabulous. Here's what I'd suggest. See, I've found that when a buyer walks into the house and they fall in love with the house, they're falling in love with everything that's with it, including the chandelier. And rather than making that part of negotiations when they make their offer, why don't you and your husband go over to Home Depot or Lowe's this weekend, find a chandelier that looks like it belongs, and let's switch it out now. You already know you want to take it with you. So let's make sure that doesn't become part of the conversation with the buyer. Does that make sense? Yeah. Same things with homes that have drapes. Okay. The old FAR/BAR contract, drapes were not included. Drapes were considered, they're hanging on hooks, the same way a picture is. A picture is a personal property, you get to take it with you. The new contracts, though, drapes are included. Well, the last thing you want to do, and we did have this come up about a year and a half ago, where one of our agents ended up paying for drapes for the buyer because they didn't have the conversation with the seller, and the seller packed them up and then moved out of state. Okay? You're walking through the house, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I see that the drapes in your bedroom are matching the bedspread. Very unusual pattern. Are you planning on leaving the drapes? Oh no, we're taking those with us. Again, it's like, thank God they're really ugly, but you need to let them know that in the standard contracts, they're included. You make a note of it so that you can talk about the exclusions when you're dealing with an offer on the property. Okay. Light fixtures, ceiling fans, those are all affixed. They stay with the property. Everyone has flat screen TVs now. They're mounted on the wall. The TV gets picked up and gets taken with them. However, the brackets, all the wiring, that's affixed to the property. They are supposed to stay. If they have built-in speakers, they're attached. They stay. These are conversations you want to have with a seller. And I find when you have that conversation with them at this point, it's a whole lot easier that when you're presenting them with an offer, you go, remember we had this conversation when we listed your home? Let's go over it again just so you make sure. All right. Occupancy is or is not currently occupied by a tenant. Easy enough. If it's a rental property, it is. If it's a primary residence, you're checking is not. God bless you, Rafli. If it is an investment property and there's a tenant in there, not only do you want to fill in the date that the lease expires, but you need to ask the owner for a copy of the lease. Okay? Remember, when you sell a property that has a tenant in there, that lease transfers with the sale of the property, unless you're making arrangements that that tenant is moving out and it will be an empty property. It'll be vacant at the time it closes. So if there's a tenant in there at closing, all of the security deposits, the last month's rent, anything that the landlord is holding in escrow for that tenant transfers to the new owner. So you need to know that in order to talk to the title company and make sure that all transfers. Easiest way, make sure you get a copy of the lease. All right, paragraph 3, price and terms. Well, price is easy enough. That's what you're talking to the sellers about, how you're going to list the home. Financing terms. I suggest you always check cash and conventional. VA and FHA, if you haven't already done so, I strongly suggest that you meet with Supreme Lending, with the lenders in your office, and you go to their classes about VA and FHA, because there are specific terms tied to each of those. Not only price points, but lending criteria, condition. VA, there has to be certain conditions of the property that are met. A VA appraiser can go out and look at the property, and he actually can override what came back in an inspection report that your seller has to fix. So be very careful that the properties are acceptable for VA or FHA lending. Okay. Now the next part of this, seller financing and assumption of existing mortgages, right? Seller financing, extremely rare. Extremely rare. I wouldn't even bother talking about that in your listing presentation, in going over these documents. Just skip over that. If a buyer is asking for seller financing, you're going to have attorneys and accountants involved in it. You'll be talking with it at that time. Don't muddy waters by talking it ahead of time. Same thing applies to assumptions of existing mortgages. The only mortgages that are assumable are VA mortgages. Now, if a vet allows their mortgage to be assumed, they lose their benefits going forward on the next house they're going to buy. So in 30 some years, I've had one instance of a vet that's let his mortgage be assumed because of circumstances, they were never going to be buying another property. So that was a way of being able to get his property sold at the time. So again, for all intents and purposes, most of this paragraph, you're just not talking about with them.
Richard, quick question.
Go ahead, Mark.
So what if the person that took out the VA loan passed away? Is someone still able to assume that loan?
If they've passed away, you're dealing with their estate. Very good question. I have never faced that scenario. That would be a really good question that you could ask either Title Alliance or Supreme, and they would give you a much more accurate answer than I can.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Richard.
I've come across scenarios where we just had one that Adriana was talking about this week in team meetings. The seller passed away a couple of days before closing.
Wow.
And it's like what had to happen with the estate and the trust in order to get it to close. But I've never come across the specific question that you asked.
Okay, I guess better off that way. Easier.
You get it. You'll get an accurate answer from either one of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Now, seller expenses. We're going to start seeing this more and more for the last 3 or 4 years. It's very rare. This is when a buyer is going to make an offer on a property and they're asking for the seller to pay 3% towards closing costs and prepaids. Okay. My problem with this in the listing agreement is, why would you have a seller commit to doing it up front before anybody asks for it? It's something that you should be discussing when it is asked for in the offer, which is why I put in here, just leave it blank. Don't have them commit to it. However, it is a good time to have that conversation. You know, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I just want to explain this line very briefly. There are certain sellers out there that have really good credit reports. They're eligible for a mortgage without any problem. However, the cash on hand that they have, they might want to use to come in to do renovations on your house, you know, to put in a new kitchen. You know, when they close on it, they might want to buy all new furniture for the house. So they're having limited money to pay towards closing costs. So they're simply asking you to pay for their closing costs. We'll talk about it when the offer comes in, but you should never dismiss it just out of hand. Remember, it's what you net at the end of the day, not how the offer is structured. So I just want you to remember we talked about this. We'll deal with it in specific when it does happen with an offer, okay? Now, again, with the shifting market that we're in, I think you're going to see this more and more. Okay? It's a way of buyers being able to try and negotiate down what they're offering on the property. And yeah, here's the way I want you to look at it so that you understand it better. If you had real simple numbers, you had $100,000 listing. Somebody comes in and offers you full price on it. Seller's going to net $100,000. If they offered you $100,000, but they want the seller to pay 3% in closing costs and prepaid, the seller's netting $97,000. Now, there's nothing that says you can't go back to them in a counter offer that says seller really appreciates that, and they'll give you the 3%, but their counter offer is $103,000 with the 3% credit. They're looking to net the $100,000. It's just how it's being structured. The numbers are not changing any for what the seller's netting. Does that make sense to you, how to explain that to somebody? Yeah. Kind of the same explanation for how commissions are working these days. You know, who pays the commission, the sell side, buy side? Doesn't really matter. It's all figured into the transaction. It's what the seller nets at the end of the day. Okay. Now, paragraph 4, broker's obligations. Easy enough. It says we're going to make diligent, continued efforts to sell the property in accordance with this agreement until we go under contract. Multiple listing service. Okay. Placing the property in the multiple listing service is beneficial to the seller because the property will be exposed to a large number of potential buyers. Okay. Guys, I'm sure you have all been reading articles coming out in, you know, FAR and NAR and Realtor magazines, primarily driven by Compass, who is trying to list properties and not put them into the MLS. They want to keep all of these listings in-house so that they can sell them in-house. I can't figure out what their argument is for a seller as to what benefits the seller. Because Compass might have a couple of thousand agents in this area. If your listing goes into the MLS, between the Miami and Broward Palm Beach boards, you've got 80,000 realtors who are working with all of the buyers that are out there. What do you think is better for the seller? To keep it in-house where 2,000 realtors are going to see it, or to put it in the MLS where 80,000 realtors are going to see it? This is simply explaining that to them. And you might actually say, have you read anything in the news about what's going on with, in-house listings versus, putting them in the MLS? If you say, no, I don't know anything about it. All right, good. Let's go on. As an MLS participant, brokers obligated to enter the property within 1 business day of marketing the property to the public. Your seller literally doesn't care about this. This is for you. Once you advertise the property, which means putting a sign in the yard, putting it on the internet, sending out mass emails, that's marketing the property. It has to be in the MLS within 24 hours, within 1 business day. Now, you can put it in the MLS in coming soon status, which enables you to market the property, to put a sign in the yard. And there's all kinds of advantages in doing that. The offices have been having classes specific to open houses. That's one of the biggest benefits of doing coming soon. Make it active the day you're holding that open house. It will drive the most number of people to your open house. And when you have an open house that has 20 or 30 people coming through it within a couple of hours, as opposed to 2 or 3 people, all of a sudden you're building a whole lot more excitement about this property. And you have a better chance of getting multiple offers at or above the ask price, because now people are seeing how much activity is going on with this property. So watch for those classes in the office. Learn how to do a proper open house that works to your advantage and to your seller's advantage.
Richard, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So this paragraph 5 doesn't mean that after this agreement signed, we have to input it in MLS. That's not the case, right? Because that's
No,
my
if you can have this signed and do nothing with it. In the case that I gave you, well, let me give you another more practical example. When my wife takes a listing, she does professional photographs for everything. Now, it'll take 3 or 4 days to get the photographer out there to get all the photographs back. She will not enter this in the MLS until she has those photographs back, so she can do everything at once. There's no rule that says she can't just hold this listing agreement, but she cannot market it or advertise it until she puts it in the MLS.
And then once she market or advertise it, then it has 24 hours to enter it to
Correct.
MLS.
Has 1 business day after. So if she
1 business
orders
day.
the sign to be put in the yard of that property, once that sign is installed, she better have it in the MLS within 1 business day.
Yeah, my initial understanding was after signing, then we have 1 business day. Now, thank you. Thank you for correcting.
It's just
Yes.
marketing it. Now,
Yeah.
This is going back a good number of years, and it's why I've always told you, put it in the MLS as soon as you have it signed. And this might be where you've heard me before, August, talk about it and just getting a little confused with it. Because here's what happened this, like I said, number of years ago. An agent took a listing and didn't put it in the MLS for a couple of weeks because the seller was doing a number of things in the house. Another agent with another brokerage knocked on the door of the house and said, "Hey, I have a buyer that would really like to see your house. They're looking in this neighborhood. I've heard that you might be thinking of selling." The seller let them into the house. They went to contract because the seller was either an idiot or was just really slimy and tried to go around to our agent that had the signed listing agreement. Well, we ended up suing the seller, and that seller ended up paying a commission to both the agent that brought the buyer and our agent that had the signed listing agreement. Now, my point of view was if our agent had gone ahead and just put it in the MLS, that never would have happened. Right? Now, back then, when that did happen, there was no such thing as coming soon status. We now have coming soon status. So my advice is you don't have to put it in for, one day until after you market it. I'm suggesting you put it in right away, put it in coming soon status. You're protecting yourself. Does that make sense for you, August? You understand why it's like two different scenarios for this to get to the same place?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for clarification.
All right. So next page. Broker authority. Seller is authorizing us to market the property to the public unless it's limited in the checkboxes below. The marketing includes, but is not limited to, flyers, yard signs, so on and so forth. These are the things that once you do them, it has to be in the MLS. Public marketing also includes marketing to agents outside your office. It includes putting a transaction sign, for sale sign on the property. Use the seller's name in conjunction with marketing the property. I have no idea why you would ever use a seller's name to market the property. If they're that famous, they probably don't own the house. It's probably under the name of a corporation so that they're hidden from it. Now, there is a checkbox on line 59, and you see I wrote in there, do not check. If you check it, it says that they don't want you to display the property on the internet except for the street address. I'm going, okay, what use is that to anybody? And it says not publicly market to the public. And it says seller does not authorize the broker to display the property on the MLS. Do not check that. This is the box in the listing agreement that there are some Compass agents that are checking. It simply means that they're not putting it in the MLS. Going again, why? I don't get it. Seller understands and acknowledges that if they check either of those boxes, a for sale sign will not be placed on the property. And they understand and acknowledge if they check either of those options, broker will be limited to marketing the property only to agents within the broker's office. Only if you check those boxes do they have to initial line 66. So you don't check them, don't initial it. Now you see my comments there on the cheat sheet for you. All right. C, obtain information relating to the present mortgage on the property. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, when we get a contract on your property, the title company will need to see your mortgage documents. Could you get those together for me now so we're all prepared for when that happens? Well, why do they need to see my mortgage documents? Well, because when they're preparing the closing, they need to know who to contact for the payoff of your mortgage. Well, I own my property free and clear. Fabulous. We just need to see those documents so that they can verify that everything is taken care of and there is no current mortgage on the property. Hi. Line D, have no idea why this is in a listing agreement because we don't provide a CMA to potential buyers. That's their agent's job. E, check if applicable. You'll see I have checked to use a lockbox system to show and access the property. Now, you're going to talk to them about the lockboxes. And I'm talking about the Supra lockbox that you buy from the board. I'm not talking about a combination lockbox, which I hope none of you will ever use on a property. There is no security to a combination lockbox that you buy at Home Depot. You can literally take a hammer and open that thing up to get the key from it. Super lock boxes are extremely secure. Believe me, I've tried taking a saw and opening one that jammed up and we couldn't get it open. Not only that, and here's your conversations with the sellers. The super lock boxes record every time they're opened, and you get notified of it as the listing agent. So, John from XYZ Realty is going to call you, or they're going to call showing time and say, I'd like to show this listing 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You get to call the seller, or showing set it up so that showing time will call the seller and say, John from XYZ Realty will be showing your house 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. The seller can approve it or turn it down. When John shows up, you see that he was there. And one of the benefits is John gets an automated email from showing time from Supra that asks him a couple of questions about what they thought of the property, which gives you the feedback that you can then go back to your seller with. Okay? There are all kinds of benefits. And, when you're going to your scripts and dialogues classes in the office, these are great questions to ask. I need scripts and dialogues about using lock boxes. Don't push it. My advice to you. Learn the scripts and dialogues, talk to them about putting a lockbox on the house. It truly is to their benefit. It's also to your benefit when you don't have to be there to show every listing that you have. Okay? But don't lose a listing because of it. There will be certain sellers that are going to insist that you're there for every showing. If they're insisting on it, that's just what you're going to have to do in order to get that listing, be there for the showings. Now, part of it, whether they have a lockbox or they don't, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I advise you secure or remove valuables. When you go to work in the morning, don't leave home with, watches and rings or money laying out on your dresser. Make sure everything's put away. If you happen to have any guns in your house, make sure that they're locked up properly. The last thing we want is for somebody walking through your house and, something goes missing. I can't watch everything all the time. The agent that's there showing the house can't be watching everybody all the time. So just make sure that's all put away. Okay. Now, seller understands the lockbox is for their benefit, and they're releasing the broker and you guys from all liability and responsibility in connection with any damages that occur because of the lockbox. Okay. Now, check the box that says withhold verbal offers. Do not check the box that says withhold all offers once the seller accepts a sales contract. Okay. Why check the box to withhold verbal offers? Because they're useless and non-binding. Okay. If anybody is serious about making an offer, they'll put it in writing for you. You're going to have investors, and it's primarily investors who are looking to steal properties, are going to call you up and say, well, will the seller accept this? Well, Mr. Buyer, I appreciate the verbal offer. However, my seller has instructed me not to call them with verbal offers. If you want to put it in writing and send it to me, I'd be happy to present it to them and get an answer for you. You'll find out real quick if they're serious or not, so that you're not wasting your time going back and forth for something that will never come together. Okay. Now, the reason I'm telling you not to check the box on withhold all offers once they accept a sales contract is because if you do, that stops you from accepting backup offers. And again, with financing and inspection clauses, a certain number of transactions will fall apart. Why should you not accept a backup offer? If you have a backup offer and buyer number one comes back and says, well, we did the inspections and we want this, 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 and this, and we want a $10,000 credit for repairs, you get to turn around to that agent and say, you know what, we've already got a backup offer waiting for us. So if your buyer's not taking it as is, let me know now so we can put that second offer into place. And you'll generally find that buyer number one backs down real quick. So it's to both yours and your seller's benefit to be able to take backup offers. All right. Line 74F says, I'm acting as single agent for the seller with consent to transition to transaction broker. Personally, kind of a stupid place in the listing agreement to put that line. We're going to be talking about that in detail in a couple of minutes. Now, virtual office websites. Again, you really don't have to go over this paragraph with your sellers because VOWs, virtual office websites, really don't apply anymore. There were some companies out there. Redfin actually started this 10, 15 years ago. When you went on to their website to look at a property, you actually had to sign a digital document that said Redfin was going to represent you in looking at these properties. That was a vow. Doesn't apply anymore. With Zillow, Realtor.com, all of the websites out there, people can look at absolutely everything. What's important are the next two checkboxes. Line 81 says seller does not authorize an automated estimate of market value of the listing. Sound familiar? That's his estimate. How accurate are his estimates? Not very. Even on Zillow's website, it will tell you that estimates can be up to 20% off. That's a huge range when you're looking at a property. And I know everybody goes to Zestimate. Here's another little piece of advice for you. When I said you're called to go out on a listing appointment, the very first thing you do is pull up the tax records on the property. The second thing that you should do, go to Zillow, put in the address, and see what Zillow comes up with as estimate. It's going to come into play when you're going through your market analysis with the seller. Look at it this way. You think the house should be listed at 600,000. Zillow is telling you the estimate is 650. Do you think you're going to have a different type of conversation with the seller as to why it should be at 600? They've already gone to Zillow and they've seen what it says. And you're now arguing as to why you think it should be one price when, gee, the computer told me it should be something else. You know, it's like, okay, Dr. Google, you know, this is just an estimate. Here's why this should be what we do. Now, do you know how to explain to them why Zillow doesn't work? Here's an easy way to look at it. This is using condominiums as an example. You're in a building that's got 20 stories to it. You know that stack A, stack B, stack C, everything in each stack is the identical floor plan. But is something on the third floor worth the same thing as the penthouse apartment on the 20th floor? Shake your head no. Every floor you go up, the price increases. Zillow doesn't know that. Their algorithms can't figure that out. Okay? Maybe the unit on the 15th floor has been totally renovated. But the penthouse unit is in original condition. That makes the 16th floor unit worth more than the penthouse. The algorithms can't figure that out. If you're dealing in single family homes, Most subdevelopments, there are only 4 or 5 floor plans within the community. Is every one of the same floor plan worth the same thing? Of course not. Even in new construction, there's changes in value depending on where the lot's located. If you're backing to a road, it's a totally different value than if you're backing to a lake. If a house has a basic builder swimming pool compared to the seller called in one of these pool companies and they've got this magnificent resort style pool patio area, it's a different value. Market valuations like Zillow are simply looking at price per square foot. You're the real estate expert. When you're pricing a house, you're looking at every other house that's on the market and every house that's sold, and you're going in and looking at all of the photographs so that you can tell the seller, well, this is what this one had. You know, it had a brand new kitchen, new bathrooms. Look at the flooring in this. Look at the pool patio area. You know, your house is kind of equivalent to this one. However, this other one around the corner is on the best lake lot there was in the neighborhood. And when they bought that house, they paid $100,000 premium just for that lot. These are the things that you should know as a real estate expert that the computers will never be able to figure out. Now, why do I tell you not to check that box? Because if you do, your listing will not upload to Zillow or Trulia or any other website that uses the automated market valuations. If you don't check that box, it will go to those sites. Now, I would rather have them on those sites with a wrong estimate, but at least I can get phone calls from potential buyers and I can explain to them why that estimate doesn't work. Does that make sense, Mr. and Mrs. Seller?
Richard,
Go ahead.
I checked that box, and then I still have my listing in Zillow, but without the Zestimate.
Right. Now, here's the difference, and good pickup for you. Zillow is now a real estate brokerage. They're pulling it from the IDX feeds, not from what was a feed authorizing them to do it or not. So you're correct with that. However, all the other companies out there like Trulia or Realtor.com or some of the smaller ones that are using the automated market values, they're no longer allowed to pull those feeds. So yes, in Zillow's case, you're correct, but in all the other sites, they're still not pulling them.
Okay.
Zillow is the biggest one out there. Realtor.com, not too far behind, but yeah. So to me, you're better off just not checking that box. Now, the next one, you see, I did check it. It's one of the things that you'll find in the MLS is if you don't check that box, it's allowing other agents and actually anyone in the public who goes to the website and looks at the listing to write comments about it. I refer to this as Yelp or Open Table for real estate. And I know that all of you have decided not to go to a restaurant because you read a negative review on it. Am I right? I know I am, because I do it with my wife all the time. You look at the reviews for the restaurant and decide if you want to go or not. Well, why would you let somebody write a review on your listing and potentially stop someone else from going there? Right? Because somebody thinks that it's a small kitchen, the next person might not, but they might not go because somebody else made the comment on it. So these are just my preferences, guys. I'm sharing with you how I feel about it. You get to do what you want, but I wouldn't let anybody write comments about my listing.
Hey, Richard, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Does anything on the listing agreement affect how it would show up in Zillow and Realtor.com? Because I've had a couple of listings and my clients are like, we can't find it in Zillow, like on the map or something.
Yeah. If that happens, reach out to Miko. He's
Okay.
the expert on all that, knows the background. If you're putting it in the MLS, if you're not checking those boxes, there should be nothing that stops it from showing up in Zillow, Realtor.com, any of the other websites.
Okay, thank you.
Right. All right, paragraph 7, seller's obligations. They're going to cooperate with us in carrying out purposes the agreement. And, Mr. Seller, if you're talking to somebody at work or somebody just shows up and knocks at your door because they saw the sign on the front yard, please don't let them into the house on your own. You don't know who they are. This is a safety issue for you. Here's a stack of my business cards. Just make sure that anybody that inquires about your house calls me. That's what you're hiring me for. I'm looking after your best interests. Okay. You also understand from what we've talked about before that, we have additional MLS obligations I've got to look after. You're going to provide me with keys, making your property available. And please, 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 if you decide that you're going to rent out the house or you're going to take another mortgage on your house or otherwise encumber it, let me know, because that affects our ability in order to sell your home. E simply says the broker's indemnifying and holding us harmless because of seller's negligence, representation, misrepresentations, actions, or inactions. What this is simply saying is this is your home. And if you are representing something that I don't know about and a potential buyer sues us because of that representation, that was your representation, not mine. You're indemnifying our brokerage on that. Kind of actions or inactions. If a buyer is walking up to your front door and they trip on that broken sidewalk tile that we talked about, they're going to sue everybody, but that's your sidewalk, not mine. So if they sue my brokerage because of it, you're indemnifying us. That was your sidewalk. And we talked about you need to have that fixed anyways. Use of a lockbox, we already talked about that. And the existence of undisclosed material facts on the property. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Paragraph F says, at closing, you're going to perform any acts necessary in regard to FERPTA. At closing, there is a document that you're going to be signing regarding FERPTA. If you have questions about that, we can put you in touch with Title Alliance, who will be able to answer any of your questions regarding the closing and FERPTA specifically. Paragraph G is talking about the seller's disclosure. When we finish on this document, the next document we go over is called the seller's disclosure. Florida law simply states that the seller shall disclose to a potential buyer all facts that materially affect the property's value and are not readily observable or known by the buyer. Now, the law doesn't state it has to be in writing. However, by putting it in writing and putting it in much detail as we can, that takes away liability from you. If a seller closes on the house and says, well, you didn't tell me that there was a leak under this window and now I have mold everywhere, they might come back and sue you for the damage because caused by the mold. But if you put on the seller's disclosure that, we had a leak in the front living room window and we had it recaulked, resealed, and tested, you now told them about it. And the fact that they're coming back a couple months later and saying, well, there's mold in there. Well, you know what? You had the right to look at it when you inspected it. I told you about it. It pretty well wipes out their case for coming back and suing anybody with it. But, there's a multi-page document. We'll go over that as soon as we finish this one. And H is really quite simple. I'm a real estate professional. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not, dealing with any law or, other issues. If you have questions regarding that, please seek out an expert in one of those fields. If you don't know somebody, I'll be happy to recommend somebody for you where you can delve deeper into those questions. And we come to the part where we get paid. Okay. Now I'm going to kind of jump back and forth a little bit on this one for you. I want you to write down, make this note. 8A, 10B. Those are the paragraphs that you should, and the lines that you should be filling in. Okay. 8A, and you can read here, it says 8A is, is just the commission that the seller is paying us. So I'm giving you an example. You would put in 3%. It says 3% of the total purchase price is paid at closing. Now, skipping down. 10B, the seller authorizes the broker to offer compensation to the buyer's broker from the seller in the amount of 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is you're negotiating. Total commission, and again, just examples here, total commission is 6%, but it's being explained to the seller, my commission is 3%, and down below, we're discussing what it is you're going to offer the buyer's broker for bringing the buyer and doing their job to this. Now, there are some agents that will check 10A. 10A is the seller's broker to the buyer's broker. So if you're putting 3% in here, then 8A is going to be 6%. You understand that? This is the total commission. Now, if all of you are familiar with the lawsuits that we went through last year that were settled, okay, all of the attorneys out there are filed these lawsuits basically saying, well, realtors were never upfront, never explained to a seller how commissions worked, that they were actually paying the buyer's agent. Well, our argument is, yeah, we did. We always had that discussion. These new contracts make it really clear. Now, the Department of Justice is still looking at all of these agreements. My belief is that within the next couple of years, they're going to prevail, and you're going to see the total separation of commissions, where we are no longer allowed to pass through a portion of our commission to the buyer's broker, which is what 10A is all about. My belief is the seller is going to pay us, and the seller is agreeing to pay the buyer's broker. It's not a pass-through from Keller Williams to the other broker. They're paying them directly. Makes it real simple and clean.
So does that mean, so Richard, so does that mean in 10A, we, like, say, for example, the total in 8A was 6%, and then 10A, the percentage would be 3%?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But what I'm suggesting, Michelle, is you use 8A as your commission.
Yes,
and 10B as to
gotcha.
what they want to offer. Now,
Okay.
here's a way to present it that makes it has our good agents are actually making more money today than they did before these changes. Why are they doing that? Because when they come here, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my commission is 3%. This is the work I'm doing for you and representing you in getting you to the closing table, and you're going to explain to them your value proposition. But I get paid 3%. Now, what we have to discuss is how much you're willing to pay the buyer's broker. Well, I don't want to pay the buyer's broker anything. Well, here's the problem, and you need to know how to have the conversation with the seller. Well, if you don't pay the buyer's broker anything, they're probably not going to bring the buyers to your property. You've read about all these changes in the laws, and we now have to have a buyer broker agreement signed before we take them out, where the buyer is agreeing to cover a portion of our commission, but they're really expecting that to be paid by the seller. Well, there are some sellers that'll say, well, you know what, we're paying you 3%. I don't have a problem with that, but let's pay the buyer's broker 2%. Well, a year ago, you would have taken a 5% listing agreement, and you would have split it 2.5 and 2.5. Well, now you're getting paid 3, and the seller's instructing you to pay out 2. Now, the other broker's not going to be real happy about it. I'm more worried about you guys. Let them join KW, and I will teach them how to negotiate for a better commission. Does this make sense to you guys? Any questions about the compensation part of this? All right, so let me go back up here. So 8B is in dealing with options, which we don't deal with. So you're always going to leave that blank. If you have a seller who I don't care whether you sell it or lease it, you would put 10% of the gross value of the lease. You're now creating compensation no matter sale or lease. Okay. D, broker's fee is due in the following circumstances. And I'm going to explain to you ahead of time. This is one of the paragraphs where if the seller is an attorney or they want their attorney to review the agreement before they sign it, this is the most popular paragraph that an attorney is going to mark up. Okay. Excuse me. Now it says, if any interest in the property is transferred, whether by sale, exchange, lease, exchange, governmental action, bankruptcy, or any other means of transfer, regardless whether the buyer is secured by the seller, broker, or any other person, attorneys are going to try and cross that out. I have no problem if they want to cross out exchange, governmental action, or bankruptcy. But if they cross out anything else or try and cross out that whole paragraph, they just took away your right to be compensated. And this is selling. Well, if the buyer is secured by the seller, well, if the seller knows the buyer, they need to refer them to you so that you can deal with the transaction. It doesn't matter where the buyer comes from. Governmental action or bankruptcy, we ain't being paid anyways. So that's why I don't care if they cross out those. But I will not accept the listing agreement where they try and cross out that whole line. Now, number 2, if the seller refuses or fails to sign an offer at the price and terms stated in this agreement, well, you know what? The seller has the right not to sign any offer. We get paid when you have an offer and it goes to closing. a buyer can literally offer them full price cash. They're waiving the inspections. It is a hard cash deal from day one, and the seller still has the right not to accept that offer, and we don't get paid on it. Seller can go, that buyer came through my house and tracked mud through my living room. They kicked my dog and insulted my wife. I don't care if they offer me twice my list price. I'm not selling them my house. Mr. Seller, you have every right to do that. We get paid when we bring a ready, willing, and able buyer who is going to close on your property. Now, the second part of this line has more teeth to it. If they default on an executed sales contract or agree with the buyer to cancel the contract. We've had these cases. We're going through one right now. It's actually tail end of being resolved. A week before closing, the seller called our agent and said, you know what, my wife is really unhappy. She can't find where we want to go to. She wants me to cancel this contract. Here's your response. Mr. Seller, I totally understand. Be empathetic. I totally understand. But I strongly recommend that you speak to an attorney, because what you are asking to do is break a legally binding contract, and the buyer does have legal rights. Now, I also need you to understand that my broker also has the right to be paid the commission due under the terms of our contract. Now, if you have an attorney to speak to, that's great. If not, I'll be happy to recommend you to one. And, we recommend Harley Storing, who's a great attorney dealing with these type of issues. Now, you can share stories with them. We had a case, going to say 2 years ago. It involved Audrey Benassi, an agent in our office. She had a seller who refused to close on it. The buyer took the seller to court. Not only won, and the court forced the seller to sell the property, but the seller paid $34,000 in legal fees. So this is where you want to emphasize with the seller, buyer does have legal remedies, and it might end up costing you more in the long run to sell the property. Be empathetic with them and let them know what the laws are. Okay? If that ever does happen, where you get that phone call from a seller, call me. Help yourself. Just reach out, tell me this is what's happening, and I will help coach you along as to how to handle it. Now, the case that we're going through right now, the agent used all of those scripts and dialogues with the seller. They've been talking with them, helping them understand this is just an unhappy wife. And you really want to go through all of the legal ramifications of this. And it looks like we're 90% of the way to actually having them close on the property next week. So we'll talk about it. We'll get you through there. All right. And then the last line, if the seller transfers or contracts to transfer the property at any time before the termination date, we get paid. Retained deposits. You have an escrow, buyer walks away, escrow is retained. This used to have a default of 50%. Even then, I used to teach, put in 0. Mr. Seller, I am here representing you in all of your interests. If there's an escrow dispute and those monies are retained, our belief is those monies go to you. We get paid when your house closes. In the meantime, you're the one that made the mortgage payment, insurance, taxes, all the rest of the expenses of carrying your house. You deserve those funds. If that ever happens, there's one thing I'm asking of you. I want you to tell your family, your friends, your coworkers that you have a realtor that always looks after your best interests. And if they ever need a real estate agent, please refer me to them. Guys, the repeats and the referrals is worth a whole lot more to you than keeping a portion of a commission. Okay? F simply tells them, remember, brokerage commissions are not set by law, are fully negotiable. Paragraph 9 is simply telling them that buyers brokers could be compensated by the seller or broker, and the buyer's broker might be compensated by other people. Everything is totally negotiable. This is just explaining to you how the compensations are working now because of these changes in laws. We talked about paragraph 10. Now, paragraph 11. Okay. This is something that I really want you to consider how to talk about this in your listing presentation before you ever get to the listing agreement. Okay. This is called agency. Now, Mr. Seller, I want you to understand that the state of Florida works under the assumption of transaction brokerage. That means that all realtors are assumed to be representing the transaction, not representing a client. See, my brokerage and myself, we believe that's wrong. We believe that you are hiring us to represent you and your interests. It creates a fiduciary relationship between you and Keller Williams. That's kind of the same relationship that you would have with an attorney, that you have with your accountant. If you have a good stockbroker, it's the relationship you work with them. It means they put you before their best interests. Now, one of the reasons that this is so important is I want you to understand that probably 95% of all realtors out there work as transaction brokers. And I can tell you with assurance, Coldwell Banker, Kai's, most RE/MAX agents, Better Homes and Gardens, all of them, their listing agreements that are customized for them are just transaction brokerage. They will not let their agents work as single agents. I am one of the very few brokers in our board that believes and teaches single agency. I believe you have to be representing the best interest of your client. Now, think about this. If you're talking about this in your listing presentation, you've never had the chance to get to these documents. Now, if your seller is out interviewing a couple of different agents to decide who they want to hire, and you've talked about how you work as a single agent, but everybody else is a transaction broker, to me, that puts you heads above anybody else. So you're interviewing other people. I understand that, totally respect that, Mr. Seller. When you're talking to those other agents, remember to ask them about agency and how they work, because this is something that should be very important to you. So you've already created a wall that those other agents are going to hit when they're not allowed to talk about single agency. Okay, so let's talk about what is single agency. Well, dealing honestly and fairly. Everybody is going to deal honestly, supposed to deal honestly and fairly with you. Unfortunately, we all know that doesn't happen all the time. The next 4 items are the important ones here. Loyalty. So, Mr. Seller, I am loyal to you and just you. You come first in everything that I do in dealing with the sale of your home. Confidentiality means anything you tell me, anything that I find out during our transaction about you stays with me. If I have a seller that I know they're selling the home because they're getting a divorce, no one will ever find out from me that that's the reason the house is for sale. If, God forbid, I knew that a seller had a terminal illness and is selling the property, no one will ever find that out from me. Anything you tell me or share with me stays with me. In a transaction brokerage, that's not there. That doesn't exist, which means a transaction broker, anything they find out about you, they get to share with everybody else in order to put the deal together.
Richard,
Okay. Go ahead.
quick question. How do you respond when they ask you if the person died in the home? Because I know in the state of Florida, you don't have to disclose that.
Well, it's not something that has to be disclosed on the seller's disclosure. Like, there are some people that are totally spooked by it. How would I answer it?
Yeah.
I'd answer it honestly. That's not something that's confidential. Now, let me go to the next one, which is obedience. Mr. Seller, I have to take directions from you. If you're selling this home and you're selling it because it was your mother's home and she died, if it wasn't a violent death, she just, didn't wake up one morning. Is that really something that has to be kept secret? I don't know, but if you're telling me that you want it kept secret, it'll be kept secret. Take your seller's direction with it. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Okay.
But there are buyers that are spooked by having someone that had died in the house. Years ago, it used to be if it was a violent crime, it should have been disclosed, but even that's kind of been removed. Now, you can say, well, if it was a violent crime, it's public record. And if the buyer is really concerned about it, they can search public records and find out.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you.
You know what? Michelle, that's just one of those instances you've got to read that particular person and why and how.
I was asked by an agent, and I think it was because the person is spooked by a person passing away in the home.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, why?
And a lot of seniors
People
pass away in their homes. Like you said, they just don't wake up. So
absolutely. And, why should that affect somebody else? It shouldn't, but there's that really small percentage of people out there that they're just spooked by it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. So, that was a good example for speaking about obedience. The next one, full disclosure. This is simply saying if I find out something about the buyer, for example, that the buyer is being transferred here for a job and they have to be relocated here within the next 30 or 60 days, I'm sharing that with you. If they walk through the house and I'm hearing the buyer placing furniture, that's a really good sign. And I'm going to be sharing that with you because that gives us strength in negotiating. Now, accounting for all funds, skill, care, and diligence, presenting all offers, disclosing facts That's standard with everybody. It's those 4 items that really are the ones that create the fiduciary relationship. So if that makes sense to you, I need you to sign here and here. Now, built into this agreement is the consent to transition to transaction broker. Now, the reason this is in here is because you understand that the brokerage owns the contract. Keller Williams Realty Professionals, Keller Williams Realty Consultants, Elite Properties owns the contract, which means that every agent in your office is bound by the same thing. Now, what happens if an agent in your office brings the offer to you? It means that the brokerage has to transition to transaction brokerage. All of these things that are up above, with the exception of loyalty, confidentiality, obedience, full disclosure, everything else still exists there. In all practicality, what happens? Well, Michelle, if you're working with the buyer, and Maxwell, you've got the listing, and you guys are doing a deal together, the office is transitioning to transaction broker. Maxwell, doesn't mean that you still can't represent your seller with everything you've done before. You're just not sharing any of that information with Michelle. And same thing, Michelle, you're representing the buyer to the best of your ability. You're just not sharing all that stuff with Maxwell. You're representing your clients as if they were single agents, but the brokerage is the one that's had to transition to transaction brokerage. That makes sense to you? It's an easy explanation to your seller. I personally believe this is the way that all of us should be working. And I'm hoping that one of these days, because of DOJ ruling, transaction brokerage is done away with and realtors can only work as single agents.
Hey, Richard, that makes
For now-
complete sense. Does that just include our office, or is it everyone that's under you as a?
Nope, just your office, Mark.
Okay.
I have a separate brokerage license for each office.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's just your office.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So if a buyer comes to my open house or whatever and wants me to represent them, is that I wouldn't be able to represent them, or how does that work?
Nope, you can absolutely represent
Oh,
them.
okay.
Now, they come to your open house and you're still a single agent for the seller. Okay. Only when that person at the open house says, I'm really interested, I would like to make an offer on it, you have a couple of choices. You can continue to work with the seller as a single agent, and they would sign a non-representation agreement with you.
Okay.
That means they have no representation. You're just there to do the paperwork, put the deal together. I don't necessarily like that. Or you have them sign a buyer broker agreement, and you're automatically transitioning to transaction broker for both parties.
Okay. I mean, that's what I thought. Clarify that.
Yeah, to me, that's the better way to do it.
Yeah, that's what I usually do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay,
I have a quick question, Richard.
go ahead.
So how long would you say I should be spending going over this agreement with the seller?
Depends on how much detail you want to get into with them, how many stories you want to share, and how detail oriented they are. Mark, have you been to a class or studied the DISC personality types?
They like briefly went over it, but I'm not familiar where I can say I'm comfortable enough to say I know it well.
All right. Go back into the office and ask for that class to be taught again. I recommend you go to it. It's a great way of reading people. DISC, D-I-S-C. I'll cover it really briefly with you. A D personality is a driver or dominant personality type. A D personality, they'll kill you if you try reading this entire document to you. They want, what's the bottom line? Right? Get to it really quick. If you spend 2 hours in a listing presentation with them, I'll guarantee you lost that listing. And I personalities are generally extroverts. They want to talk forever. They don't necessarily care about the details. You can share stories with them about other people. They love name dropping. They love brands. They want to know who you know, not what you know. An S personality, when you walk into a house, if there's family pictures all over the place, that's generally an S personality. It's a very stable personality. They're about relationships. The C personality, that's the accountant. That's the detailed person. So sharing that with you to answer your question, if you're with an accountant, you're going to spend 2 hours going over this document. They're going to want to go over it with you the same way I just went over it with you. They want to read it line by line and understand everything that's in here. That's why I'm going over it with you the way I am, so that if you have that personality type, you understand what every line in here is and what it means. C's, thankfully, are a very small percentage of the population. If you're dealing with a husband and wife, you're going to walk in, you're going to have conversations with them, and the purpose of understanding the DISC personalities is you'll understand who each of them are and how you're going to deal with both of them at the same time. So if one is a D personality and the other one is a S personality, you're talking to each of them as they want to be talked to. Mr. Seller, I understand you just want to get to the bottom line of this, but I know your wife is going to want to have a little bit more information on it. So is it okay if I address her concerns? Okay. It's, the golden rule is do unto others as you want to be done unto you. Golden rule doesn't apply all the time. It's called the platinum rule. Do unto others as they want to be done unto them. Treat people as they want to be treated. Explain it to them as they want to understand it. Okay? So it's a tough question to answer. There are people that I know that literally they can get through this in 15 minutes. I can tell you that my wife probably spends 2 hours at a listing presentation, if not more. But that's from the beginning to the end, not just on the paperwork. That's her building the relationship, walking through the house, having conversations, understanding everything with them. Because if you build that relationship and you have that trust with a seller, going through this will be relatively easy. Does
Okay,
that answer your
makes
question, Mark?
sense. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Richard.
Okay. All right. Last page, conditional termination. Okay. I will put 0 in here. I personally don't believe in charging somebody a cancellation fee. If they're not going to be selling their property, they call me up and they go, you know what, my job transfer fell through. I'm not going to be moving. You know what, if you're happy with that, I'm happy with that, Mr. Seller. I don't believe in charging you for not selling your home. However, in this case, there's 2 things I'm going to ask of you. First one and most important, when you are ready to sell, I want you to call me back so I can finish doing my job. And number two, I want you to tell your family, friends, and coworkers that I am always looking after your best interests, and please refer me to other people. There are agents in our office. They put down a $1,000 cancellation fee. You know what? They're butting heads with their seller. They're not getting along. The seller is telling them, I want out of this agreement. I'm not working with you. Well, no problem. We can cancel this agreement when you write me a check for $1,000. What do you, excuse me, what do you think? They're thinking about you. They're already unhappy with you. But what do you think they're telling all of their family, friends, and coworkers about you? And to me, more importantly, about Keller Williams. You will never get a referral from them ever in the future. I mean, think about it. If you're unhappy with a restaurant or with a product, you are telling more people about how unhappy you are than that instance where you had a phenomenal meal or you love that product. You might tell one or two people. Your unhappy experience, you're telling 10 people. This is one of those examples where I'm looking at it that it's not worth it. Walk away from it. You know, there are some agents, they just want to be reimbursed for their cost of taking photographs. It's like, all right, that's a little bit better. I personally, I still look at it, that's the cost of doing business. You know, hopefully I used this listing in order to get more listings or to get more buyers. So it doesn't matter how much money I spent on marketing, advertising, photographs, or whatever. If I did my job right, I picked up other clients from it, and that was my cost of doing business. That's why I believe in putting 0 in there. Okay. Now, this is also a conditional termination. This doesn't give them the right to go and relist the house with someone else. This just means you're taking it out of the MLS. You're turning the status W. This is withdrawn. You're not canceling the listing. Withdrawn is still an active listing, a binding listing agreement. It's just no longer in the MLS. If they want to cancel the listing, to have an unconditional termination where they have the right to go and list with someone else, you're going back to that MLA, modification to listing agreement form. And the very last paragraph on there is an unconditional termination. In that one, you are changing the status in the MLS to C, or canceled. That means that they can go and list the property tomorrow with somebody else. You're over and done. It also means when you're prospecting expireds and canceled, you should not be prospecting withdrawns because they still have a binding agreement with someone else. You understand that? All right. Dispute resolution. It means if there is a disagreement over this, it says, you can see here, do not initial. I do not believe in binding arbitration. I believe in mediation. If they initial this, then either you or I have to initial that box as well. That's agreeing to binding arbitration. Problem with binding arbitration is you're going up in front of some judge wannabe who's going to make a ruling that one party wins, one party loses, and there is no appeal to binding arbitration. If you don't initial that, you go to mediation. Now you're going to be sitting in front of a professional mediator where you're explaining their side, they're explaining the other side, and the mediator is trying to get you to meet in the middle. If you don't agree with mediation, you then get to go to court and sue each other. Okay, this is the second paragraph that an attorney will change. And a lot of attorneys will just cross out the entire paragraph. If they do that, everybody has to initial it and go ahead and let them do it. The attorneys are just saying, we want the right to go to court immediately. We're not doing arbitration. We're not doing mediation. We're going to court. Okay, let them. Their attorney's going to drive the day. So you don't have to call me if they cross out that paragraph. Let them do it. So you understand what that paragraph's all about. And the miscellaneous, the last paragraph, is, simply saying that electronic signatures apply. There are no prior or present agreements or representations. And it's saying that the very first line, and this is the one we're going through where the seller just died a couple of days before closing. This agreement is binding on sellers and brokers, heirs, personal representatives, administrators, successors, and assigns. So that person died, whoever inherited the property, the trust, is still bound by all of the agreements they signed. Okay. Now, additional terms. There are two that I pre-typed in here, and I would love to see you guys put the same thing into your agreements. Seller instructs broker that all offers shall be accompanied by a pre-approval letter from Supreme Lending. See, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, Supreme Lending is our in-house lender. They are the best I have ever dealt with. I cannot dictate that a buyer has to use them, but at your instructions, we can say the buyer at least has to talk to them. The reason I'd like to see that happen is because, one, if Supreme tells me that there's no way that this person can get a loan, why would we waste our time going through all of the negotiations and signing a contract with them? On the other hand, if Supreme tells us that these people are good as gold, I'll have no problem getting them a loan, but they decide to go with Bank of America or, XYZ mortgage company, and a month from now, we find out that they're having problems getting their mortgage. I get to go back to their agent and say, you know what? You've already had them pre-approved with Supreme. Let's get them back there and we can get this done. And it just gives us another opportunity to make sure we're getting this transaction closed.
So Richard, that's only for cash, for the mortgage buyer, right? Not cash
for
buyer.
Mortgage. If it's a cash buyer, doesn't matter. They're not talking to anybody.
Okay.
You just want proof of funds, right?
Yeah.
But this is a conversation you want to have with your seller right up front.
Okay.
You're gonna prepare them for that conversation. And in the MLS, in broker's remarks, you're gonna write in all offers shall be accompanied by a pre-approval letter from Supreme Lending. So that agent knows ahead of time. Now, again, you're not dictating that that buyer has to use them, but the buyer does have to talk to them so that you can verify they're good to go. And the other conversation that you want to have is about using Title Alliance. Guys, there is no better title company in South Florida than Title Alliance. And by using them, you get to call Susan or Adriana at any time and talk to them about what's going on with the transaction. Okay. If you're using XYZ title company, those of you that have done transactions, and Michael, Nancy, I'm sure you've run into this before. You try calling another title company and asking them a question about what's going on, you ain't getting an answer from them. They're a pain in the neck to deal with. So why not control what to me is the most important part of the transaction, and that's getting it to closing. Have the conversation with your seller ahead of time. Now, the reason that this is important, in Dade, Broward County, it has always been very typical that the buyer picks and pays for title. Well, why would you give them the most important part of the transaction? You're simply going back at the time of the offer where they've checked that box B about title. Well, my seller has already instructed me that Title Alliance shall be handling the closing. Part of your counter offer is go back and check box A.
But then who pays?
Right.
If
That's
we're,
going to be
if we're insisting that,
negotiated.
okay,
That's going to be negotiated. If you, I'm trying to think, in Fort Lauderdale office, Chris Toomey has been really, really strong with his conversations in who uses the title company and how it's paid for. Again, remember, it's all part of negotiations. So even if box A is checked, where now the seller is going to pay for title, part of your negotiations is, now you understand that in doing that, your buyer just saved themselves, $500 or $750 because they're not paying for the title, so they can afford to increase their offer by that amount. Right? Chris is really good in those conversations. And I know, you know what, in Coral Springs, the Weisbergs are really good at doing that. So you might ask them to go over their scripts and dialogues with their seller for you.
okay, will do. Thank you.
So Richard,
Yeah.
I have a question quickly. On this seller instruct to use the title Alliance, and the seller will pay for the what is it called? Pay the title insurance policy, right? On this one.
Correct.
So it's not the buyer.
Correct.
And if
Right.
the buyer chose, then the buyer will pay this title insurance policy. Do you know
Correct.
what's the price on those title insurance policy?
And the question to ask Title Alliance, it'll change depending on the price point of the
Okay.
property.
Okay, thank you.
But again, as I was explaining to Michelle August, one of the conversations and one of the reasons you want to know this is because it comes into play with negotiations. If the seller's paying for it, the buyer can then come in with a stronger offer. It's kind of like the commissions. Who pays for it? Is it the seller paying it or the buyer paying for it? In my opinion, it's the transaction that pays for it. The buyer and seller are agreeing on a price for the property that includes all of the expenses, so the seller's netting what they want to net.
You know what, Richard, I will add this in using a different title company versus Title Alliance, is that sometimes using a different title company, there are so many people involved in the transaction from that title company. And I just had a buyer close on a property, and because there was multiple people from the title company involved, she literally made the comment, there's too many chefs in the kitchen. And whereas when you're dealing with Title Alliance, it's either Adriana or Susan.
Correct. And they both know everything about every single file.
Yeah.
Well, you had Michelle in particular in the Coral Springs office, when we do cheers for peers at Teams meetings, how many of those cheers are for Adriana and Susan?
A lot.
Yeah. Guys, if you haven't used them, please do so. There is nobody better. They also teach great classes that you should be there for all of the classes that they're teaching. Okay. And if there's anybody on here from Aventura, you've got exactly the same relationship with Ariana and Harbor Title in Aventura. Make use of them. They are fabulous for getting you to closing and taking care of things. Right. Now, last thing, additional terms. One of the things what we've always seen over the years, sellers are going to negotiate with you. Well, if you bring the buyer to this, what are you going to do for your commission? This is where you would write it in. So, Michelle, I'm just going to use you because you're there. You could write in here, if Michelle Bland brings the buyer, total commission shall be 4%. Make sure it's specific to yourself, not for the whole brokerage. Okay. So additional terms is anything that you're going to agree to the seller with, this is where it goes so that it's memorialized, it's not just verbal. Yeah, there are, it's generally on contracts, could go on here. If you're using a transaction coordinator, you can write in here, seller agrees that seller shall pay, $395 to transaction coordinator. It's generally handled at contract time, but no reason you can't talk about that at your listing as well. All right, we've gone a little bit over time here, guys. I hope you got something good out of this today. Samantha, you had a question?
Can you confirm which form we should be? Okay. That's what I got, but there's so many options.
The ERS 20TN. The TN is the one that has the transition to transaction brokerage built into it.
TN. Okay.
Okay. And guys, on the very last page, really quick before we go, seller signature, phone numbers, address, email address. I put this in here for a reason. I'm real tired of seeing these with just signatures. There's a reason we ask for all that information. Please fill it in. Do us a favor. Okay. And then your name and signature, your office name, the office phone number, and office address. Just as we need this information up above, your seller needs to know where the office is and how to contact us if they're having trouble contacting you. And finally, it says copy returned to the seller, put in the date. If you're sending it to the seller for digital signatures, put in the date you're sending it to them. I understand that all the signatures are time-stamped. They're generally sending it back the same day. Don't leave this blank, put a date in there. There's a reason this is in a black box so that it stands out. You need to put the date in there and how it was returned to them. Okay? That's it, guys.
When do you guys release the video for us to reference back?
As soon as I get it back, which is generally later today. So within, offices will be closed by Monday.